Hey guys, sorry I can't be there. I am at our state convention, which actually works well with what it is that we are talking about. As a Kentucky Baptist, I have responsibilities to our state convention and our local stuff. And so it just so happens today, we're going to talk about all the ins and outs of various church governments. I realize there are differences between denominations, and we're not going to be able to look at each and every denomination or each and every difference between denomination. What we're going to do is we're going to zero in on a specific theological issue as it applies to the church. So if you remember from last week, we looked at several characteristics that the church must have. These include being founded on Scripture as the central authority of the church, gospel preaching, evangelism, discipleship, fellowship, worship, spiritual disciplines like prayer, and we had a list, I think, of 14 things. And one of the last ones I put there was membership. Now, most churches have some form of membership, whether it's formal or informal. As a Baptist, it's very formal. With membership of the local church comes certain privileges. But what membership is it says that you as a member are responsible for the well-being of the church. The church is responsible for the well-being of each and every member. And so in the Baptist tradition, membership is a formal requirement with significant benefits. But one of the big things that sets churches apart, and membership comes into play of this, is what we might call church polity. Okay? Church polity. And I'm hoping you can read this board because you're going to need to see it. Polity is a weird word. It just means government. So for those who may know a little bit about Greek, this comes from the Greek word polis, right, which means city. This is why we have Indianapolis, right? Minneapolis, and what those cities mean is Indianapolis means city, polis of Indiana, right? Minneapolis is city of Minnesota, right? So there are polises all over this country because English is so influenced by Greek. So when we're talking about church polity, we're really talking about church government. And so what we want to do then is to figure out how, according to the Bible, is the church supposed to function? How is it supposed to be organized? Right? I'm sure you've noticed in your church, you don't just walk in and people just randomly do things. You probably have a pastor. You may have a deacon board. You may have elders. You may have people claim to be apostles if you're from a charismatic perspective. There may be people who you don't even know their name, but they could send your pastor from your church to a whole nother church, and you get some weirdo the next week, right? That's what happens in the Methodist tradition, for example. And so there's all these varieties of how a church is structured, the local church is structured. What we want to do is ask, what does the Bible say about this? Now, already you can tell there is some differences among Bible-believing Christians and traditions. So I'm going to share with you my view. My view will be the Baptist view, of course. But I really want us to see how did these things come about and what is the thinking of it biblically. Let's start here. Okay, what are the offices of the local church? According to the Bible, what are the offices? Now, we talked about this last week because one of the characteristics a church must have are biblical offices. And we concluded there were two. If you wanted biblical evidence of this, read the pastoral epistles, 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus. You'll find that Paul appoints deacons and elders, and then in those letters, he explains what is a deacon and elder and what are their qualifications. And so we see biblically there are two offices. Now, some traditions will find other passages like Ephesians 4, and what they'll do is say there are more offices, and this would include the pastor shepherd, for example, apostle, prophet, ones like that. But, and those would be more of your charismatic traditions. I believe Assembly of God would be part of that, of course, Pentecostal, some of that. But for our purpose, I want us to limit our discussion that there are two offices. And so if you're going to structure your church, at the center of that structure has to be these two offices, elders and deacons, rather, okay? Now, one of the things you need to know is when we speak of elders, okay, your tradition may not use this word elders. And I really hope you can see this. I can't dim the lights here. But the word elders is the word commonly used. If you come from a Presbyterian tradition, I believe a Christian tradition or Campbellite, Disciples of Christ, something like that, they probably use the word elders. Baptists don't use this word much, although we increasingly are. We use other words. In the Bible, this word it has synonyms, and we know there's synonyms because we see like 3 words used as synonyms in the same passage. So in Acts 20, Paul appoints elders. But then in the same passage, 2 other words will be used. Those words are bishop and pastor. So we could put here bishop or pastors, okay? And it would have the same meaning biblically. There are 3 different words in Greek, but it's the same meaning in English. Now, for our purposes, we're going to use the word elders. However, we could use the word pastor. So I am the singular elder of East Frankfort Baptist Church. Your tradition may have elders, which is a separate office from the pastor. Okay, we'll get to that. But this word, biblically, there's 3 words meaning the same thing. These would be ruling elders, ruling pastors, bishops, whatnot. And of course, deacons. Deacons is the other. I suspect your church has deacons in it. The word just means servants. And so the first deacons are appointed, from what we can tell, before the first elders in the church. In the infant church, when they're figuring all this out, deacons are appointed first. That's Acts 6, I believe it is. One of the first deacons gets executed in the next chapter, and he didn't last too long. That's glad I've never had that experience where we appoint a deacon and within the next year he's with Jesus. So, but Stephen being one of the first 7 deacons, and they were charged with serving tables, if you will, seeing to it that the funds of the church were distributed among the poor appropriately between the 2 races, the Jew and Gentile, whatnot. And so we see them popping up in the epistle letters and elsewhere where they have a serving role. Now, the qualifications for elders and deacons are almost exactly the same. Compare them in 1 Timothy and Titus in particular. They're very, very similar. But their roles, biblically speaking, are different. This would be more of an authority position. This would be more of a service position. Okay? With that said, how then do churches function as a government? So if a church needs to update its aesthetics, its carpet, its painting, or maybe has some building issues, buying property, selling property, put a new roof on the church. So like at our church where I pastor, we have some property that we have obtained that we're likely going to sell it. So if you want to buy some property, have I got real estate for you? But who makes those decisions? Okay, do we as a church make that decision? And so who within the church makes those decisions? Or is there an outside entity that we are associated with or are over us? Do they make those decisions for us? Right? And so another question is, who hires and fires the pastor? Okay, so how did I become the pastor of East Frankfort Baptist Church? Did some dude in Nashville, Kentucky, where the Southern Baptist Convention is, did they appoint me at East Frankfort? They could have sent me all over the world, and they sent me to Frankfort, bless their hearts, right? Or was there a different way of doing that? Okay, so let me start with the least biblical, and then we'll land with the Baptist position, which is the right position, right? No, let's start with what I perceive to be the less biblical one. When I say that, I'm not saying that this is a heretical position. What I'm saying is that when you put the biblical evidence together, I'm not sure it quite adds up, okay? And this position is the Episcopal. And let me write it over here so I can have more room. The Episcopal or Episcopalian position. Now, right away, you notice that word Episcopal, Episcopalian, is attached to the Church of England. The Anglican Church, Angles, where we get English, the Angles, English. But Episcopalian is the American version of the Church of England. So it's no wonder then that the number one church denomination at the time of our founding as a nation was Episcopalian, because they were all British and they all brought over their church traditions. Now that has since died, particularly after the Great War, because you don't want to go to England's church, do you? We just sort of kicked them out of town. And that's actually where we get the rise of Baptists and Methodists is from, in America, is from the Revolutionary War. No one wanted to be associated with the Brits, and Baptists were more democratic, which was the new direction of the country. Anyways, that's free. Anyway, so the Episcopalian form of government. This would include the Roman Catholic Church, obviously the Church of England, the Episcopalian Church, and other traditions. What you need to see is this is a top-down form of government. Think of this as a one elder rule church. That is to say, you have the chief elder here, right? He is at the top. Now, this person goes by multiple names, okay? In the Church of England, it's the now King of England, was the Queen for like 3,000 years when Queen Elizabeth II was living, right? She was the head of the church. And so when Henry VIII in the 16th century broke off from the Catholic Church in order to divorce his wives, not a good reason to start his church, by the way. I don't recommend you do that. He transitioned from the Pope being the head of the church to the king being the head of the church. So in the Catholic tradition and Episcopalian tradition, you have a chief elder, the king, or in the Catholic version, the Pope. So this is why when often I'll be critical of the Catholic Church and say, you're not going to find the Pope in the Bible. He's not there. We talked about Matthew 16 last week. You are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. The Catholic Church interprets that as saying Peter as the first Pope. Well, Pope is not in the Bible. He ain't there. And Peter certainly isn't functioning as the Pope, okay? However, what they say is, well, Pope is a word, yes, but he is the Bishop of Rome. You see that word coming up? It's the word elder, but they choose a different word in English. So the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, okay? And he sits at the top. In the Catholic tradition, the Pope, or the Bishop of Rome, is the only one who can rightly interpret Scripture. This becomes a problem with Protestants, particularly the Protestant Reformation, is that Luther says, well, I can read the Bible, and you're wrong. And the Catholic Church would say, no, only the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, can rightly interpret the Bible. Okay? And we talked about that a little bit when we looked at the doctrine of Scripture and clarity or perspicuity of Scripture. So you have the elder. Underneath this chief elder, and I'm simplifying this for our purposes. What you're going to find, for example, you may find archbishops, right? You might call these cardinals, right? There's different levels in the Catholic Church. I'm just keeping it simple, okay? And so we'll call these archbishops to keep that term bishop involved. I don't know where the term cardinal comes from. It's a Catholic thing. But archbishop would be those, now the cardinals appoint the Pope, so they're like just under the Pope. But essentially what you have is below the chief elder, bishop, Pope, King of England, whatever the tradition might be, you're going to have a group of other elders. And I don't know if, archbishop, they're using that term. So they are of the bishops, they are the arch, okay, right? They're the chief. That's what the word arch there means. They are the chief bishops. And so under them, you're going to have, let's call these priests, okay? Again, I am oversimplifying this, okay? So if you go to one of our Episcopalian churches, it's going to be a little different what I'm showing you. I'm just trying to keep it simple, okay? But we'll call these priests. Now, priest is a biblical word. I just don't think it's a New Testament word, right? We have a priest in the New Testament. His name is Jesus, and you ain't it, right? But nevertheless, it's a different tradition. They have priests, not pastors, but that's a whole nother discussion we don't have time for. But you'll notice here, you have someone at the top where they delegate some authority under them, which they have lordship over other people whom they delegate authority to. And then here at the bottom is you have the churches, right? I'm just going to do circles. It's quicker than squares, right? So here are the churches. And so what you'll find then is that in one of our Anglican churches here in Frankfurt, Catholic churches, is they are priests over these churches. Some of them may have multiple churches, not many. But what you'll find is this priest or this group of priests, they may rule, Frankfurt Catholic Church or Frankfurt Anglican Church or whatever. And this week they're doing Mass and whatever. But by Monday, they get a note from the Archbishop saying, we need you to serve in West Indiana or something like that. And so they have to. Why? Because it's top down. Here's one of the issues that comes in this type of government is who owns these churches. So let's say this church right here, okay? Right here in the middle. Let's say that church as a congregation and they have a priest leading them. They say, you know what? We really don't like the direction that the Anglican Church is going. They're going quite liberal in their theology. They're ordaining homosexuals and transgenders, and we're really uncomfortable with this. We don't think that's biblical. We're going to have to break off from the Anglican Church. Well, you can do that, but the church doesn't own its property. So as a result, what the hierarchy does, what the church does then, is they will say, you are no longer welcome here. You are then exiled. You don't own the property, we do. And we can do whatever it is we want with this property. And so what you have are churches and their governments actually have been suing each other the last several decades because of the rise of theological liberalism. This is going on in the Methodist Church. I don't think, Methodists have something like this. It's sort of between this view and the next view we'll look at, I believe is what Methodists have. But if, there's a lot of Methodists in the United Methodist Church, by the way, who are dividing, and they're concerned with the liberalism of the Western side. The African Church is quite conservative, and actually the only thing holding it together theologically. But these churches want to break away, but they, in terms of property, they can't do it. And so they have to end up suing each other and figuring out all of that. Okay, so that becomes a huge, huge problem. Here's my question for you. Is anything like this in the Bible? So when Paul is planting all these churches, is he the head of every church he plants? I don't really see it. Is Peter the head of all the churches? I don't really see it. We see bishops, pastors, whatever, exercise an authority over a singular church, James in Jerusalem, for example. James invites leaders over, and he sits as the chief elder of the Jerusalem church. But what he's not saying is, hey, every church across the board, here's how it's going to function. Right? He says, we believe the gospel is by faith alone. Here's some practical things we can do to keep the faith and keep unity of the faith. So I have a hard time finding this in the Bible. And remember, we submit to authority of the Bible, so it's going to be hard to find this. So I hope this makes sense. It's very hierarchical, okay? One guy at the top, it's one elder led, okay? We got to move quicker than when I've been moving. The other one is hierarchical, but it is a shared authority. So if the first view is of one elder, the second view is of multiple elders. The second view is known as Presbyterian. Now, right away, you can see there's an entire denomination named after this. Now, this isn't the denomination. It is to say the denomination of Presbyterianism has a Presbyterian church government. with it, okay? I know that makes no sense, but just stick with me, okay? Because there are non-Presbyterian traditions that follow this approach. You're starting to find a lot of non-denominational ones who are like associating with each other are kind of doing something like this, especially if they're elder-led congregation. Now, again, if Episcopal is chief elder, Presbyterian, it has a multiplicity of elders. This is where I actually think that the Presbyterian approach gets a lot of things right. My one criticism of Baptists is I think we get this part wrong. What Baptists have done is we don't want to sound like Presbyterians, and so we don't use the word elders. John Piper had a great quote when he came to Southern. I was a student there. He said, "It took me 14 years to convince my church that the word elder was not a Presbyterian word." I've always remembered that. I just love that quote. And he's right. You go into an average Baptist church and you start talking about elders, they think that you've converted to Presbyterianism or, some other denomination. I remember one time we did communion 2 weeks in a row. A lady came up to me and asked me if we were becoming Methodists, right? Right, Anyway, so what the Bible actually presents, and I think Presbyterians get this right, is no church has an elder. Each church has elders. So do a word study of elder in the New Testament. It's almost always in the plural. So Paul, when he leaves Lystra, for example, Acts 14, he goes in after he's nearly stoned to death. They actually thought he was dead. He goes in and he appoints elders. What he doesn't appoint is a pastor. He appoints elders. Now remember, this word means pastor, bishop. And so what he's doing is he's appointing pastors of the church, multiple pastors. And this is my one criticism of the Baptist tradition is we have a pastor. Now we may call him the senior pastor. I'm the senior pastor of East Frankfort Baptist Church. But I don't have other pastors with me. I have staff, but they're not viewed as pastors in this sort of, you may call it chief among many sort of approach. So like staff don't sit on deacons meeting usually, they don't really have ruling authority sort of decisions. Our youth guy isn't going to come in and say, this is how things are going to roll. No, he has a process he has to go through. Same thing with our music and everything else. But Presbyterians, they have multiple pastors across the board. And then you have deacons who are there to serve. What Baptists have done, I think wrongly, is we've merged these two offices. So you have deacons who think they're elders. And so you can go into a Baptist church and the deacons may be ruling elders. They just call themselves deacons. Some churches, deacons are good servants. I really have that at East Frankfort, been blessed. The problem is that the role of pastor is often alone. And I'm not sure you're going to find that in the New Testament. But anyways, that's me. You do with that information whatever you want. Let's look at Presbyterianism real quick. It's going to be very similar to what we just saw. But again, the difference is not one person top down. It's going to be multiple, a group of people top down. So we're going to start here. We're just going to call them the chief elders. Right? I'm just going to use generic terms here because there's multiple denominations this might describe. And so what you have then, a general assembly would be the term you're looking for. These are the chief elders, okay? They sit at the top and they lay down the law for everyone else, okay? They meet, they make decisions, and whatnot. And below them are a body of elders, okay? So we're just going to call them elders. Just, again, use generic terms. And below them, I'm going to do my circles again because I'm lazy. Churches. Okay, so here are churches. Now, what you need to note here is each church is elder-led. So they have a bunch of elders ruling each of them. Okay, and so if you were to go to Frankfort Presbyterian Church, right, or whatever, that church government, that local church is run by multiple elders. Okay, pastors, but however, what you get then is some of these elders and some of these elders, right? They're going to form an elder-led group that is above those churches, right? And so you're going to see this. So some of their elders are going to serve on these boards, okay? And so not only are they responsible for their local church, but they have ruling authority over multiple churches, okay? as part of this elder board. But then, right, and these elder boards, there's a bunch of people running on them, right? They have general oversight. So let's take these guys here, and they're going to form the General Assembly. They are the chief elders, okay? And so you have a hierarchical structure in the Presbyterian system. However, instead of one person over a group of people, what you have is a group of people over a group of people who are over a group of people who are over a group of people. Okay? So you're going to find this in obviously your Presbyterian traditions. I think your Methodist traditions will borrow some of this. They're a cross between Presbyterian and Episcopalian. I think. I'm not an expert on the Methodists. They get their name. It was a derogatory term. The Wesleyans, Charles and John Wesley were accused of having a certain method of doing things. They call them Methodists. We still call them that. Much like Baptists, it was a derogatory term to be called a Baptist or a dipper. We were called dippers because we rebaptized everybody as adults. So that was a compliment. Well, we eventually just took it upon ourselves. We kind of liked the name. So there we are, Baptists. The Christian church, some of y'all are in that tradition. You can probably guess where that comes from. Alexander Campbell comes and he's going to set up the Church of God, the Christian church. And so all these other churches are not Christians, right? Because we go to the Christian church, right? And you with that information, whatever it is you want. But the Presbyterian denomination choose that name because in the name it tells you they are elder-led. Presbyteritos means elder in Greek. So they choose an elder-led approach to church government. Now, you're going to have the same issues within the Presbyterian church you do Episcopalian. Who owns this church right here? Who owns this? Okay? That church says, you know what? We've decided to go liberal. We've decided to become Baptists. That would be a story. I'd like to meet that church. But you know, we've decided to break off from the Presbyterian Church USA or the Reformed Presbyterian Church or whatever it might be. Well, who owns that property? Does the church own it, or does the denomination own it? I mean, that denomination headquarters may be in a completely different state, yet they own that property. So if you wanted to buy property as a church to expand your ministry, well, you have to go through the hierarchical structure and all of his regulations, expectations, and they're going to send people in and do all that sort of stuff. So it slows things down quite a bit because of its function, okay? And so during COVID, you can see how all of this became quite complicated. So if the Pope says everything's going to shut down, you're going to shut down regardless. I had a buddy of mine when I was in Breckinridge County. There's a lot of Catholics there. Next to Baptists, there's tons of Catholics. And he was telling me his thoughts about certain passage of the Bible. And I thought, it doesn't matter what you think. You got to do what the Pope tells you, right? Well, it's very similar here. You lack any real authority at your local church. You have some deacons and elders and stuff. But ultimately, you are under the denominational structure. So who your church elects to serve above it is important, but who they elect to serve above them is important. Who they elect to serve above them is important, right? And so with each step, the local church loses power and authority. Okay. Now again, do you see this in the New Testaments? Now you see elders. That's very clear. Elders, very clear. And I've already been critical of my tradition that I don't think we are honest about that. We're more scared of being confused with Presbyterians than we are to be faithful to Scripture. However, do you see this? Now you can say, well, the apostles are up here, but is that how they function? You know, maybe a little bit, but we don't have apostles now. So do elders sort of take that, role? No. Let's look at one more, okay? One more. I think the Presbyterians get something right. I think they just get a bit crazy with the structure. Okay. Let's look at the third church government, and that is, we'll call it congregational. Okay. Now, I fit within the congregational position. Many of you all, your church structure is this. However, I am not part of the congregational movement. That is a separate denominational and Protestant movement. So congregationism was quite influential during the colonial times, for example. I am congregational. I'm just not part of the congregational movement. Okay, I'm Baptist. So, all right, with that said, remember one of the big questions we've had is who owns the church? Who runs the church? Is it people outside of the church? Or, here's a new option for us. Does the church itself run it? Okay? So let me give you a generic way that congregational churches work, the whole church government, okay? Now, watch, because I'm going to do this slowly so you don't miss it, okay? Watch real carefully. Someone wake up Timothy. All right, there you go. All right, here you go. Here's the church structure. That's it. That's it. It's the church. That's it. There's no one above the church with authority. There's no one below the church with authority. It's just the local church. This is congregationism. So who runs the church? Well, it's in the name. The congregation runs the name, or runs the church. So let's go back over here, right? All three of these traditions have had elders and deacons as the primary structure. This tradition does the same thing. You have a ruling class within the church. You have a servant class within the church. And then you have the regular, what I'll use the Baptist term emphasis, that's church members, okay? And so when it comes to things like who owns the property, the church owns the property. That is why here at East Frankfort Baptist Church, where I'm standing right now, I'm in a Sunday school room in our basement. Over here to my right is our back parking lot. We own a plot of land. There's a double-wide trailer park behind our church. And they're all full except for one plot of land. We own it. Now, we can sell it, and we've tried to do that a few times. We can do events there, right? And to reach that community, we use our property because no one there can say anything. It's our property. No one, not the government, not the Southern Baptist Convention, not the Kentucky Baptist Convention, not the Franklin Baptist Association, not First Baptist Church, not Buck Run Baptist Church, not Paris Baptist Church in France, if there is one. They cannot tell us what to do with that property. They can't. They have no authority whatsoever. We decide what to do with it. We've got other property that we're going to definitely try to sell, almost certainly, and we are the ones who own it. We're the ones who sell it. We're merging with another church while we have that property, and they had a bank account. Well, part of that merger is our people have to then go and file the paperwork, go to the bank, and all that sort of stuff. Why? Because we own that. That becomes our bank account. So think of something like, how do you hire and fire a preacher? Well, what I did, and what all my other Baptist brethren have done, is we send resumes to the local church. And so I sent my resume and YouTube links to some of my sermons to East Frankfort Baptist Church. They announced they were looking for a pastor, so I sent them to it. And they formed, in the Baptist tradition, a committee, because Baptists love their committees, and it's annoying. They had a search committee, a pastor search committee, and they met with me and other candidates, and we went through a process. And then I preached before the church. I did a Q&A with the church. I met the members of the church, by which the church then elected me as their elder, as their pastor, bishop, if you want to use the Episcopalian term, okay? So notice in that whole scenario, the church functions as an autonomous congregation. So if the Episcopalian is one elder, the Presbyterian is multiple elders, congregational is whatever function you want, basically, okay? The key word here is autonomous. That is to say, there is no outside entity that has any authority or power over us. We make our own decisions. We own our own property and stuff. It's us. So the church that we're merging with, in fact, this upcoming Sunday when you're watching this, we're going to officially close the church. They chose as an autonomous church to close. And they chose as an autonomous church to merge with us. Okay, so what that meant was we, as a separate church, we could not go to them and say, look, this is what you're going to do. Rather, what we did in partnership with them, they had come to us and said, we need to close our doors. And then we just came and said, how can we serve you in this way? And one of the ways we can serve you is if we take on your property, thus you cease to exist, and then we work to take care of everything else. That burden is lifted off of you. We get the benefit, however, of their remaining membership comes here. Their pastor is now going to be a member of our church, and I'm going to put him to work, right? Whatever funds they have, their property, all of that. That is a responsibility on our end, but we can never go over there and tell them what they're going to do. Nor is there anyone above them or us saying, all right, Trinity, you got to merge with East Frankfort. There's just no one to do that. However, within this system, there are structures there. Now, we've talked about deacons and elders within the congregation. We have added a term called trustees to help with the building stuff, but they are under the headship of the church. So the church appoints trustees to help represent them, to fix the roof or something like that, okay? Well, with that said, what we have, let me talk as a Baptist here. And other traditions do this, but let me talk as a Baptist just for the sake of simplicity, okay? What we have are organizations we associate ourselves with. So for East Frankfort Baptist Church, let me use my church. We have the Franklin Baptist Association. Now you'll notice here, I put the Franklin Baptist Association over here. They are not above us, they are not below us. Rather, it is an association of churches coming together to pull the resources together to reach Frankfort better. So let's illustrate it like this. Here are churches, and here is the okay. I think I lost you there. My phone was doing weird stuff. I'm getting a lot of texts, a lot of it has to do with the Capitol. So I don't know which part you lost me. So let me go back over here. These circles are a bunch of churches who have come together as autonomous congregations to pool their resources, and they call it the Franklin Baptist Association. That's how East Frankfort functions. And here in Frankfort, all the Baptist churches come together and we pull our resources together to do missions. We have an orphanage down in Haiti. They've been good to me and my work at the Capitol. We do a lot of food stuff, helping the poor. We have ministry at the Kentucky State University, just a whole bunch of stuff, okay? So it's autonomous churches choosing of their own accord to serve in this area. Now, this church over here, they may associate with the association, but they don't give a dime. They don't come to the meetings. They don't participate, but they are technically part of the association. Now, what we cannot do is say, hey, an association says you owe us money. Can't do that because the church is autonomous. This is also the structure of the Kentucky Baptist Convention, okay? The Kentucky Baptist Convention is an association or a convention of churches around Kentucky. Again, this church here may not give a dime to it, but they choose to associate themselves with that convention. Now, with each of these, Southern Baptist Convention works the same way. So it's a nationwide, sort of, it's really global, the Southern Baptist Convention. Now, what you have here is, let's say, this church here and our local association, state convention, or national convention, they decide, you know what, we think we should start baptizing babies. Yeah. Now, as an autonomous church, you can baptize babies, right? The Kentucky Baptist Convention, or any other association, they have no authority to tell you not to do that. They do, however, have the authority to disassociate you from the convention. We've had to do that within the Kentucky Baptist Convention with churches who were pro-LGBT. I went to one state convention where we as a convention were going to vote on it, right? So we don't have the president say, I've decreed, rather the convention votes on it. We're democratic in that sense. And so the convention allowed this church and its representatives to defend itself. They were marrying homosexuals. They had a homosexualized pastor and stuff like that. And I thought, watch it, I was a naive preacher at the time. I thought they were going to stand up and they were going to defend themselves and say, well, it's not as bad as you think. No, they stood up and said, you bunch of bigots, right? And so the vote came up and we're like, all right, you're gone, okay? You can keep the name Baptist. We have no authority over your church name. You keep your property. We have no authority or ownership of your property. Keep your pastor. We have no authority over that. But we have a confession of faith by which all churches have aligned themselves to, and to fall out of that means to fall out of the convention. So if our church decided to baptize babies, our church would be asked to leave our association, our conventions, right? And so we have autonomy, but each church chooses to associate itself with. So if you come from an independent Baptist tradition, those, for the most part, are independent, and that's it. And so there are missionaries from the independent Baptist tradition. When they go to get support, it's much more difficult for them because they have to hop from one church to another, because those churches don't talk to each other. They haven't formed an association. Whereas, like with Haiti, our association church says, here, we're going to give you some of our resources, and then together we're going to say, we're going to give X amount of dollars to that orphanage because we want to keep it run in a very dangerous country. Okay. Right now, the Southern Baptist Convention has tons of missionaries around the world. Kentucky Baptist Convention has missionaries all over the state. I'm one of them. My work at the Capitol, I am a Kentucky Mission Service Corps is what it's called, MSC. But I'm a missionary of the Kentucky Baptist Convention. Now, I'm a voluntary missionary. The KBC doesn't pay me. But if I were to be out of line theologically, they would disassociate themselves with my ministry there. But I'm a missionary. And so if asked, I can go around all kinds of churches, associations, whatnot, and share about what the Lord is doing at the Capitol as a missionary. Okay? So these are the three structures of church government. Episcopalian, hierarchical with one elder. Presbyterian, which is hierarchical with multiple elders. And then there's congregational, which is autonomous congregation. And it's more loose with how they define elders and deacons. I wish Baptists were better at having multiple elders. I wish I had more pastors with me. But I think that would be more biblical. Rather than saying, well, you're the preacher, tell us what to do. Or in some churches where because the church hires and fires the pastor, what you get is an over-empowered deacon body, and the pastor feels like as if he has little to no authority. That becomes an issue. But if we have a biblical structure. Now, here's the question. Is this biblical? Obviously, I'm going to say yes, because this is my position. And the reason I would say yes, and you read the Bible, you tell me which one you think is best. Or some traditions, like I think the Christian tradition does this, it's going to be a mixture of two of them. But when Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, he is not worried about the Philippian church having an opinion about it, because who cares what the Philippians think? But he wants the Ephesian church to raise up elders, to make decisions, to function. And in this context, I think membership is really important, because who makes up the church? And if the church is responsible for its own business and how it functions and who leads it, then you need to know who are members. And then let me really speak here as a Baptist. Members are those who are Christians, and they've been baptized and recognized by that church as Christians. So this is where we get the term regenerate church membership. Okay, so I think I've talked long enough. Lord willing, I'll be here the following week, so next week, 2 weeks from when I'm recording this. And we will look at the end times. So I'll tell you who the Antichrist is, and I'll tell you where he's living and how much longer we have before the rapture, right? I'm sure you want to know all that good stuff. I hope this helps. Any questions, holler at me. You have my contact information in the syllabus. And thank you for my wife for helping me out. And wake up, Timothy. Class is over with. See you guys. Thank you.